would like to introduce our moderator, Dr. Mohammed Abu Nimer, and he is a professor at the American University here in Washington. Please welcome Professor Abu Nimer.
Sabah al-Khair, Assalamu alaikum, good morning. These three greetings should, I think, respond to many of you at least. Again, my name is Mohammed Abu Nimer. I'm pleased to be here and also happy to sponsor as well as contribute to the conference and the gathering here. It's a great opportunity for us to hear papers, presentation, trying to link the movement, such a movement, with the notion and concept of peace building. And thank you for coming here. I'm not supposed to say any words, but once you put somebody on this podium, you have to say a few words. So I'll say three points here, hopefully help to frame the discussion and maybe the conversation. The title is Overcoming Otherness and Living Together. In the field of peace and conflict resolution, the notion of otherness is central in many ways. In one way, the concept is crucial, has been a crucial aspect of our study and theorizing of the field in terms of trying to understand the dynamic of conflict and the dynamic of peace building. And therefore, one of the assumptions made in the title that we do need to overcome our otherness in order to be capable to live together. That assumption is not necessarily agreed upon in the field, especially if you talk about otherness not as a negative term only, and the intention in this title, otherness, is basically a negative deconstruct of the other. So that's one aspect in the theory, the debate whether we still need the other in general in understanding the conflict. The second point I want to make, we still struggle in the field of peace and conflict resolution in the techniques and tools to overcome the otherness. What techniques and tools do we have around us and with us to help people overcome the negative otherness, the dehumanizing of the other, the disconnection from the other? Our tools are, I think, emerging, but they still really have a long way to go. We talk about dialogue, we talk about compassionate listening, we talk about some other basic tools, but I think the field is still struggling with the tools, not only the theory. Third point is about the unity in diversity as a construct that has been suggested. If you overcome the negative otherness, then we are moving towards the unity in diversity as a model. These are the 3 points I wanted just to put forward for also our panelists in their conversation as well. I will not read the biography for each of the distinguished panelists with us here, but I will follow definitely the order that we have at the speaker and invite Jessica Rahman, a PhD candidate from University of California, Riverside, in order to talk about the violence of identity formation and the case of Hizmet exceptionalism. We will follow the same format. Please write your questions, and then we'll have hopefully an interesting discussion. Thank you again.
Hello, good afternoon. So, identity is a very precious commodity, right? And groups act together in order to defend that identity. And usually that defense of identity manifests violently. This is not always the case. Hizmet is an exception to this policy. And it's because it fosters empathy. Empathy is bridging those gaps of disconnectedness. And Hizmet is an exceptional model for creating individuals and groups with a dramatic amount of empathy, which is a great step towards ending collective violence. And so it disengages violent processes, violent identity formation boundaries. And that's what I'm going to talk about today, how Hizmet's different from other collective identity groups, and which processes it actually disengages and engages. And also give some talking points about how the group can progress further in its positive sort of empathetic structures. So violence, manifests from several interlocking sources. My theoretical model identifies those three sources as cultural knowledge, social order, and circumstances. Now, these three sources combined create the foundation of any identity, okay? And they also determine a group's propensity for violence or a group's propensity for altruism, okay? Here I am going to focus on several sources or several components of the cultural knowledge component, okay? Because culture is so embedded. And those are inclusion and exclusion, twinness, self-doubt, and dehumanization. These are the four components that are part of cultural knowledge. Now, cultural knowledge is basically made up of shared perceptions and collective thoughts that a community holds to. It is provided by the mechanism of culture, okay, and it is a source for all group knowledge. Now, whereas I'm referring to culture, it's also encompassing religion, because religion is a major part of culture. Religion and culture inform one another. And our New Age term is culture, whereas it would have been referred to years ago as religion. So here, they're one and the same, although they can be distinguished, but they do inform each other and create group knowledge. Now, Islam, regional ethnic traditions, and national heritage have fused together, okay, to create Hizmet identity, what I refer to as Hizmet identity. I'm not creating a monolithic identity for everybody, but since we are talking about collectives, it is, formed from, like I said, regional traditions, religion, and national heritage, which is very strong within the Hizmet group. So my synthesized theoretical model has to do with social goal theory, which is a psychosocial model for understanding genocide, created by Ervin Staub, who was a psychosocial theorist. And it synthesizes the model, the total model, combines Mark Juergensmeyer's cultural concept of cosmic war for understanding religious terrorism. So the goal here is the theoretical model is to understand how we get to that place of mass violence, how groups move in that direction. And so social goal theory is a theory that purports that every group has goals, and how those goals are determined is determined by the identity. And how is identity determined? By the goals. So it's this reciprocal and perpetual process of identity formation that social goal theory is trying to address. So identity determines the inclusion and exclusion of future goals, ideals, and behaviors. And those future goals, ideals, and behaviors, they dictate the person's identity. It's this give and take, this push and pull that keeps us always changing and always forming our identity. So identity is not stagnant. It's not this thing that we all just carry around with us or we have in our back pocket. It is a continual process. It changes all the time. And we need to keep that in mind. So, and cultural perceptions refers to how a group sees itself, how a group views its own history, and also how it views the world. So when we take those things into account, if a group views the world as already violent, okay, then they're more likely to engage in violence, okay, because they view their own violent actions as reactionary. And if a group has traumatic cultural memories that they carry with them as a collective, and they frame those memories in a way that informs their identity as victims and engages, humiliatory processes. So all they know about their history is that it was humiliation. Groups are moved, okay, to basically participate in violence in order to gain empowerment, to overcome that humiliation. And so cultural traumatic memory, how they identify within themselves as a group, and how they view the world, it all helps to create these self and external perceptions that move us to violence or move us away from violence. So just a quick note on my methodology. The way that I obtained my data was through in-depth interviews, largely located in Southern California with the Pacifica Institute. And it was an equal number of men and women. The interviews lasted around sometimes an hour and a half to 2 hours, so they were quite lengthy. And so the data is very situated, though. I want to make you understand that this is not, I'm not talking about Hizmet in totality. I'm talking about Hizmet in Southern California specifically and the United States, because the United States community, the American community, their culture has manifested certain instances within Hizmet identity here specifically. So it's not applicable to, in a specific sense, to Hizmet in other countries. So this research is highly situated. So authenticity, the search for a legitimate, distinctive identity, is what drives us to sort of push other people away and also to bring other people in. It's that inclusion and exclusionary processes that basically form our identity. Like I said, what determines our goals and our behaviors. So shared knowledge is what constitutes important and valuable group ideals, okay? And it socializes individuals with beliefs and practices and behaviors accepted by the group. Okay, that's how the collective gets formed. That's how those bonds get formed. It basically says, like I said, what we are and what we are not. It creates the us-them dichotomy, and it's what happens when we other someone or another group, when we exclude them. We exclude them from the moral domain. Our moral domain is comprised of people who we see as us, other human beings, essentially, right? And so when we other someone, they're not human, they're not part of our circle, we don't apply our morals to them. So they're not subject to our same processes of morality. And that has to do with the exclusionary process. Now this is fostered due to largely negative stereotypes, propaganda, and that's how we create us, and that's how we create them, that's how we define what we are and what we are not. So it's not necessarily always othering another group, it's just defining what we're not that sometimes leads to these exclusionary identity formation processes. So it can be a very simple, it's usually a subconscious process. Oh, I don't like that, or I don't want that. And that can roll into these very negative stereotypes. And these get reinforced by people holding on to them throughout their lives without going ahead and getting the right information. They don't engage with what they see as different or what they have excluded, so they hold on to those misconceptions. Values and beliefs of Hizmet have created this fabric, centered on inclusion instead of exclusion, which is why Hizmet's so exceptional. And Lokman, one of my informants, and all these names are obviously pseudonyms, all faiths are welcome. We are reaching out to all people in the community. So they don't rely on negative stereotypes. They don't believe the propaganda. They're saying, okay, people are telling us about these people. I'm going to go out and find out for myself. That stops that exclusionary process. That stops that fear from the unknown and moves Hizmet past that basic exclusionary process. So real human interaction, which Hizmet is involved in, really stops those negative identity formation processes that are so important in order to build peace. However, through my interviews, there was one bone of contention in this exclusionary-inclusionary process. There was a tendency for Hizmet members to reach out more so to Abrahamic faith communities, Jews and Christians, because they're relying on sort of those similarities in the Abrahamic faiths. And this has the effect, unfortunately, because it can't exist, the what we are can't exist without the what we are not. So it's we are part of the Abrahamic faith community, okay? But it others other religions, other religious groups like Buddhists and Hindus. And so that tendency, I think the Hizmet movement is sort of at a fulcrum point, where it can actually move past it. So if we bring this to their attention, which is my goal, they can actually start to reach out more to those other faith communities and rely more on fostering an appreciation for those differences, instead of relying on those similarities between Abrahamic faiths to go ahead and foster relationships. Now, this also has largely to do with the fact that America is largely a Christian country, so we have to keep that in mind. But like in California, maybe some more outreach, Hizmet could focus on non-Abrahamic faith traditions in order to stop that exclusionary process, that unconscious exclusionary process. So twinness is what I refer to as, some of you may be familiar with René Girard's monstrous double. And it basically states that sometimes what a group devalues the most and pushes away from itself is not someone who's different, not something that they don't know, but it's something that is actually very close to home, someone who's too similar. And so what happens is they other Muslims. There's not that inclusiveness of other ethnic Muslims because they're so close to home. They Hizmet has this tendency to set themselves up as the good Muslims, the Muslims who are moderate, who are based on Sufism, who don't engage in violence, and so other ethnic Muslims. And what happens is they actually engage Islamophobia. When their true goal is to end Islamophobia, which they feel is increasing in the United States, they actually end up increasing it and engaging Islamophobia and adding to that sort of frenzy. And what they really want to do is disengage it. So my other suggestion is that, based on my data, they should really reach out to other ethnic Muslims, allow them to see the model that Hizmet is using. And I know this is also largely reactionary because of America's, terrorism policies and things like that. So it's not all on Hizmet, right? It's not all their fault. But they can go ahead and disengage America's Islamophobia, and it's because of Hizmet's flexibility. Hizmet is so flexible that I'll skip this slide. It actually is able to adapt to America so well, it's adopted American Islamophobia. And so we've got to go ahead and say, you know what, be the model, be the ideal, and don't actually adopt our bad American ideals and sort of move beyond us so that we can use Hizmet as a social model, so that Americans can use Hizmet as a social model within themselves. And so this is the dehumanization process. It's just a basic chart that shows you how the basic, what we are not, the pushing away, can escalate to where it's demonization, satanization, where people are so morally excluded that they're imbued with this evil quality, so they're not even human. And it escalates, and it's just through that reinforcement of those negative stereotypes, through not going out there and getting the information about these other groups themselves. And so this is how it escalates. And this is also how the othering of other ethnic Muslims feeds the Islamophobia, and creates Muslims everywhere as evil, which I know is not Hizmet's intention. So if we can go ahead and stop that process, it can be even more inclusive. And again, like I said, sort of teach Americans something about inclusion and pluralism, which I think is a big and tough goal. So this is how Hizmet sort of disengages. It doesn't have a violent legacy because even though nationalism and Turkish culture and Turkish ethnic traditions have engaged violence against Armenians and Kurds, they've gone ahead and reached out to those communities, right? And so they're disengaging the cultural traumatic memory that we talked about. And also they don't have these false boundaries because they go out and they reach for other communities, okay? And it's all of these. So Hizmet's not just Turkish, they are reaching out to other communities. My bone of contention with this is, and this is the next slide, is that when you reach out to these other communities where they do have cultural traumatic memory, there is this denial of the term genocide. And yes, I'm bringing up the G word, I know. Don't freak out, okay? I know it's a polarizing issue, but one of my informants said we need to acknowledge, their pain and suffering, and that's the Islamic thing to do, and he's absolutely right. But when you don't acknowledge the pain and suffering on the victim's terms, it's a denial of justice, and that's what we're trying to avoid. So I would urge sort of this getting over of the G word. I know, it's scary, okay? But in order to give the victims of such a horrible crime sort of that acknowledgement, and that will largely help to bridge. The previous panel was just talking about forgiveness and how important acknowledgement is. But you've got to acknowledge the atrocities and the things that were done on the victim's terms, okay? Otherwise, it's a denial. So, and Hizmet has been great at bridging those gaps, starting that process, and they are a model for their other Turkish countrymen that completely deny, that things are happening. So Hizmet is a wonderful group for sort of making that initial step, and now I hope we can all move forward and push back together, and move us all forward in the right direction. So through education, dialogue, and universal peace, the inclusion of difference rather than the exclusion or just the inclusion of similarities, and the admittance of past wrongs, Hizmet fosters that empathy. Okay, empathy is the main key goal here because that is how you view others as human, because you view them like yourself. And so if we can, branch out from non-Abrahamic faiths, and non-Turkish Muslims, and justice on the victim's terms, I think it'll go ahead and really cement Hizmet identity in that pluralistic, altruistic manner that I know they believe themselves to be. So there won't be this discontinuity between the ideals and the behavior, which is really important in fostering the next generation and future generations of Hizmet followers and a pluralistic world, truly. And that's it. Thank you.
Thank you very much for that, and thank you for sticking with the time. Our second speaker is Dr. Margaret Johnson, who is going to talk about, from the Institute for Islamic and Turkish Studies, we'll talk about peace-building initiative in Nigeria.
I'm going to do something today that I've never done at an academic conference, and that is I'm going to spend my 15 minutes telling you a story. But before I do that, I want to just say a couple words. In my paper, I lay out the argument that Hizmet is a peace movement, that their goal is world peace. And if you look at it from the philosophical underpinnings, from Fethullah Gulen, to the emphasis on constant self-improvement at the individual level, to how the organizations and institutions embed the values and the philosophies and their practices. At every level, you can see that the goal ultimately is world peace. And this is what every Hizmet movement member is working for at every moment. So let's get to the story. You know, why a story? Well, for one, the story I'm going to tell you is quite remarkable. But more than that, it's a particular story conveys in a very concrete way what Hizmet is all about. And in that sense, it's not really remarkable at all, because the approach, the method, the impact that you're going to hear in this story, you can find in any Hizmet organization and institution. So perhaps my story is more dramatic. I don't want to oversell it, but maybe not so remarkable in Hizmet terms. Sorry, I'm short. I got to adjust this. Our story takes place in Nigeria, but I'm not going to spend time giving you the Nigerian context, and we're very fortunate tomorrow. Dr. Sani is going to give that to us, and I simply don't have the time. So I'm going to start with our protagonist, who is Mr. Jim. That's what the Nigerians called him. And in 1999, just 2 years out of university, he was 28 years old. He left Istanbul for Abuja, Nigeria. And he went there to become the Turkish language teacher and the housemaster of the newly formed Nigerian Turkish International School in Abuja, which is the capital city of Nigeria. Now we're going to fast forward 2 years later. And at that time, there was a former Minister of Agriculture. And he was really happy with the school in Abuja. And so he made a proposition to the administrators there. And he said, I have this property. It's located outside of Kaduna, which is the 4th largest city in Nigeria. And it's not being used. And I think you guys, why don't you go down there and start a school? And I'll help you get the property in shape. And so they made an agreement. And Mr. Jim, he was given this task to go down to this village, renovate the property, and open the school. And so in April 2002, he left. And he had no idea what he was getting in for. He didn't know really the history of the place. And this is a very common characteristic in Hizmet stories. So he arrived to find a sprawling complex, overgrown and dangerous, grass over his head, hundreds of unattended trees infested with all manners of insects, hundreds of poisonous snakes, scorpions, wild animals, no running water, no electricity. So in just a few months to get the place in shape. So he got to work. In the mornings, he would go out and visit the surrounding schools and meet with the teachers, and he was basically looking for bright students that he could offer scholarships for the first class. And then he would come home around 2 p.m., grab his machete, and start hacking at the grass. And just to make this very brief, this renovation included dealing with infestations of poisonous snakes, pumping honey out of unused wells in which bees had taken up residence, trimming and fumigating 370 infested mango trees, installing security fencing around the perimeter, converting some of the small cottages to office, classroom, and dormitory space. And what this place was is, while this minister was in office, he had intended this to be housing for state workers from the Department of Agriculture. And it was about 64 bungalows, but unfortunately, nothing was ever completed, nobody ever lived there. It was basically abandoned for 15 years. So he was going about his work, visiting the schools, working on the renovation, and Mr. Jim started to hear rumors. And he heard that in the village churches, it was being announced that the Turks were establishing an Arabic school, and the ministers were saying, don't send your kids there. So you can imagine this is an uncomfortable situation, right? This is a potential conflict, and our human nature is we want to stay away from that. But this is not what Mr. Jim did. Instead, he immediately started visiting the churches. And he started meeting with the pastors and the parishioners and getting to know each other and sharing dinners and inviting them to his home and taking them tours of the school. And this is what he told them. He said, I'm not an imam, I'm not a pastor. For me, all children are the same. I'm an educator. This is a science-oriented school. Your children are free to learn and practice their religion. Now, in Nigeria, they have a compulsory religious education from the state. And I believe it's 2 hours a week. So typically what would happen if Christians were running the school, they would offer Christian education. If Muslims were running the school, they would offer Islamic education. And so the Christian pastors were assuming that this is what was going to happen at this, Islamic school. But Mr. Jim said, no, this is not the case. Christian students would have a Christian religious teacher, and Islamic students an Islamic religious teacher. And he said, look, you guys give me the teacher who you think is best to teach the students Christianity. And he said, and I'm also going to renovate one of those cottages so that it can be used for worship services for the Christian students. And it is a boarding school, and some students don't go home, and so maybe they need a place for their Sunday worship service. So he continued this dialogue. And he also was very concerned about safety because they were located about, I believe, 5 miles from the capital. And the hospital is far away. So he decided to hire a nurse. And they started going out and touring around the village. And at that time, he said the people were so poor that they didn't even have money to buy 1 tablet to save their lives. And so they did this, and even they did save a young 18-year-old man's life. And Mr. Jim said, we're going to open a small clinic with the school. And so they did that. They had a free clinic. And this helped establish a lot of trust, and tensions were easing quite a bit. And then Mr. Jim started to learn more about the village. And what he learned was that nearly everybody in that village were Christian refugees. They had fled there 2 years prior due to religious conflict in Kaduna over the implementation of Sharia law. And nearly every single villager, they had either lost a relative in that riot, or they had been personally maimed, like losing a limb, or injured in some kind of severe way. And so here, he learned, he's opening this, what they see as Islamic school, in this village surrounded by Christian refugees from a religious riot. Okay, well, they proceeded. His new wife, Sophia, also a teacher, joined him for the opening of the school, as did 2 single Turkish men, and also another Turkish family The fall semester went underway. They started with 27 seventh grade boy students for their first class, and then a big crisis hit in November. Riots started in the city, a religious riot. And they were there sitting ducks in this Christian enclave with no way out and no one to rescue them. And also the students there, their parents, some of them were parliamentarians, high-level government officials. I mean, they were just serious. They were like kidnap targets. So what are they going to do? So they quickly made a plan. And he says, we decided to hide the children in the septic tanks, a place for dirty water for each home. And these were unused septic tanks from the bungalows. And each staffer was assigned 4 kids. So the fighting started. The villagers blocked the main roads with burning tires. People could not pass. For 4 days, there was no movement. In our area, Muslim people ran away. Even Muslim staff ran away. Nobody stayed with us, just Turkish staff, teachers, and students. We could not go anywhere. Not far from our school was a mosque. They burned it. They burned homes with people inside. In the city, the Christian places were burned. In our village, the Muslim places were burned. Then, so Mr. Jim asked for help from an unexpected source. One of his staffers called one of the religious leaders of the village and said, we're here, we can't leave. What are we going to do if somebody attacks our school? They're going to kill us. And the minister said, don't worry, we know you, and we're going to organize a guard duty. And that's what he did, is they posted a guard every 100 meters around that school, around the clock, until the violence had passed. So he says, even if somebody tried to attack, the guards stopped them. They said, these people are good people. They're not like other Muslims. They're good Muslims. And Mr. Jim says, the Christian people, they saved us. So his wife, Sophia, she tells a much more intimate portrait about what happened inside the school while they were worried about all the externalities. And she said, they were worried, what are they going to do if their Christian neighbors come to the gate? And this happened. And you can see, this is a real time of uncertainty, because at that point, these were Christian neighbors. They had never come to the school before. And they're knocking on the door. Do you answer? Do you ignore and hope they're going to go away? Well, they went to the gate. The Christian neighbors said, we're scared, and we feel like your school is the safest place, and we want to stay here. And in the end, 10 Christian families stayed with them throughout the riot for about a week. They ate with them in the cafeteria, and as Sophia says, she says, we prayed together. We prayed with the Christians how they're praying, and when we read Quran, they listened with us. Outside, Christians and Muslims are fighting against each other. Inside, they're praying together to solve the problem. For 2 or 3 days, we didn't do our regular program, but after that, we started the school. Really, it was remarkable the Christian neighbors came. Sophia explained, the neighbors, they know the school, but they don't know what we are teaching, and they're afraid of us because they're thinking we're a Muslim school. That week was the first time they'd come to our school. They're thinking we'll change their children's religion. After the week, they know we came here, but not to change the religion. They understand we just love the people. After that week, they trusted us. The neighbors became so close to us. When we needed help preparing the school, painting, preparing the roof, working in the garden, before, we couldn't get our Christian neighbors to work there. But after that, we found people easily. So, in the short span of 3 months, how is it that you can live a lifetime, that one's heart can transform from hate to love, that enemies can become protectors? In Mr. Jim's school in Nigeria, the Christians saved the Muslims. The Christians who had been uprooted from their homes, injured, suffered loss of family members, and the Muslims sheltered the Christians. It could have so easily gone the other way. Eventually, out of safety concerns, the school was moved to the city. After the riots, the parents wanted their children closer. The school is still open today. And in fact, in Nigeria now, there are 18 schools. They serve about 3,500 students. Nigeria, in the capital of Abuja, also has Nile University, and it's the only Hizmet university in all of Africa. And also, just this past August, in Nigeria, they opened up a world-class hospital with all of the state-of-the-art facilities, equipment, and I believe about 12 doctors from Turkey came there. So, I think my time is up. Thank you very much.
Thank you again for making my job so easy, even 1 minute before that. But more, thank you for the inspiring story, indeed. Our third speaker is Dr. Sofia Pandya from California State University, Long Beach. We'll talk about Hizmet and the Kurdish question in southern Turkey and Iraq.
Okay, thank you very much to the Rumi Forum organizers of this conference. And I'd like to say merhaba and assalamu alaikum, and I'm sending a big hug. We're all in us, okay? We're all in us. And, oh yes, so now it's up, good. So let me start with a couple of quotes, if you can move past this. The title is Hizmet and the Kurdish Question in southeastern Turkey and Iraq. And I was lucky enough to travel to beautiful Diyarbakir and Gaziantep and Erbil, very lovely. So I'm the one who has the clicker, right? Oh, here it is. Okay. There we go. That's me actually sitting with a bunch of teachers in southeastern Turkey, and that's a map of Iraq showing how many schools are set up all over Iraq from the Hizmet movement. And so I start with 3 quotes here. First with Mr. Fethullah Gulen, also known as Hoja Effendi. He says, we should remove all ideas and feelings that pull us apart and run to embrace one another. That's why I send you all a hug. And then another quote from a Kurdish university official in Iraq. A great Kurdish writer in Turkey said that if we combine the organizational power of the Turks, which is true, this conference is very nicely organized, with the heart of the Kurds, we can do anything. And then I have a Kurdish schoolgirl, and she says, our Hizmet teachers taught us, our Turkish Hizmet teachers taught us, and Kurdish, Turkish and Kurdish, we couldn't think past revenge. Now we've learned how to achieve our goals. All right, so let me start with my friend Damla, and of course that's not her real name. So a Turkish friend of mine living in California, who's a scientist from Istanbul, she told me if it were not for her participation in Hizmet, she simply would not like or associate with Kurdish people, who comprise approximately 18% of the population in Turkey. Shocked. I asked her, how could that be so? Did Turkish public schools not teach cultural pluralism and tolerance of minority groups? Was racism not condemned in Turkey? She replied that cultural pluralism was not discussed. It was not even a term, and that even the word Kurd was not used. You didn't go around talking about Kurdish people or say, I'm a Kurd or who's Kurdish. Every morning, even Kurds were asked to stand up and say something like, thank God I was born a Turk, which must have been a little rough on the Kurds. Instead, in her circle, her parents were secular, elite, ultranationalist Kemalists. Kurds were thought of as dirty, uneducated, ignorant people, and it was only after participating in Hizmet that she began to hear other sides to that story and to meet people of Kurdish descent. So what do the Kurdish people and Hizmet have in common? And let me just get there with my own slide here. The ultranationalist Kemalists consider Hizmet activists and Kurdish people both as the enemy. They other both groups because they threaten the ultranationalist vision of a homogeneous, pure Turkish state which is staunchly secular and repressive of piety. So they don't like, the ultranationalist Kemalists don't necessarily want a Turkey that is pluralistic, nor do they want a Turkey that's religious. Okay, so here's a map of the regions of what some Kurds would call Kurdistan. So the Kurdish people make up the largest stateless ethnic group with over half in Turkey. There are large Kurdish communities in Turkey, Iran, Iraq, Syria, Lebanon, Europe, and the Balkans. And there's Kurds in the room, of course. And so those areas in the Middle East where Kurds have traditionally lived are called Kurdistan. You can see it's a region, although of course the term itself and the boundaries of it is contested vociferously. So there's a theoretical framework that we can talk about exclusion and inclusion, again, that also applies to the Kurdish situation that Jessica Rahman also brought up. So Diana Eck is really a famous religious studies scholar, and she distinguishes between religious inclusivism and exclusivism. And so she says, exclusivists are groups that are isolationists and believe that they alone have the truth. And she argues that this is a form of theological imperialism and ultimately leads to racism. And we can take that theory about religion and apply it to cultural exclusivists and also ideological exclusivists. So which groups are exclusivists in this context when we talk about context of Turkey? So the Kemalists have a history of racial and cultural exclusivism that excludes or forcibly assimilates minority groups, historically such as the Kurds and the Armenians, together with a form of secular ideological exclusivism that excludes religious practitioners. Another exclusivist group would be the PKK, founded by Öcalan in 1978 to organize a strategy leading to a more independent Kurdish state. It's socialist, it's Marxist, and it draws its boundaries around itself quite tightly. And one PKK participant told me, a Kurd who joins Hizmet is not a Kurd. You know, there's this whole dichotomy of good Kurd, bad Kurd, and so a good Kurd who joins Hizmet and wants to be nice, you're not a Kurd anymore if you're in PKK. You just lost your Kurdishness. Okay, so Hizmet, on the other hand, works against exclusivist boundary drawing projects that are based on race, religion, or culture, and ultimately works towards pluralism, creating hybrid individuals with flexible identities. Our world-renowned scholar Doğan Koç, right there, argues that Hizmet effectively plays a role in conflict resolution between the Kurds and the Turkish state, and notes that it's unusual for a civil society movement, a non-state actor, to do so. And so I interviewed people, and one of my interviewees was a high school student, and she says, Turkish leaders are really great. We can see, Turkish people are good. So she was Kurdish, and through her interaction with the Turkish teachers, she was able to see that Turkish people were good. They can earn a better salary in Turkey, but they came here and they sacrificed, and they succeeded in changing our ideas. Another student said, they teach us critical thinking. This came up in the previous panel, whether education is positioned or whether it's, foments critical thinking. I think both. So they teach us critical thinking. They don't teach us anything without having the evidence. And we can say, you're wrong to them and question them with respect. And that's a very nice thing about Hizmet, that in Hizmet you can criticize Hizmet. People will listen to you. You can call into question their educational policies, and as long as you do it in a nice way, you'll be listened to. So what about the opponents of Hizmet projects in Kurdish regions? Because so when I interviewed people, Kurds, non-Kurds, I even interviewed a PKK activist, got to talk to lots of people. So some people were anti-Hizmet. They didn't appreciate Hizmet at all. And so these were some of their claims. They said that despite Hizmet power, and they sometimes believed that Hizmet had an incredible amount of power, somehow that they were not just a group of people, but that they, sort of superhuman, mysterious status with tentacles everywhere, right? We've all heard of that. So they thought that they didn't do enough for Kurds, and since they have tentacles everywhere, anytime a Kurd was beaten, that it was probably somehow Hizmet's fault. And and then they also brought up, some people brought up Tek Türkiye, which is a program on STV. And in that show, there's some Kurdish people told me that they perpetuate the stereotypes of the good Kurd, the bad Kurd. There's a Kurdish, there's a Kurdish terrorist versus the nice Kurd. And so some Kurdish people said, yeah, my Turkish Hizmet friends don't even realize that show hurts our feelings. And when I tell them it hurts my feelings, sometimes they don't realize. Some Kurdish people said, look, Hizmet's just too religious. It's too religious. We're more socialist. I heard another person say, Hizmet people, they're just not religious enough. They're women. They're not covering their chins from here to here is showing. And so you got criticism on that side as well. Some Kurdish people said, I believe Hizmet's trying to Turkify all of us. Of course, Hizmet's not just Turkish, but that was the fear that they're trying to Hizmetize them. I coined that term, isn't it cool? And they're trying to Hizmetize them, dilute their Kurdishness. In Iraq, they didn't have any complaints. I mean, I was there. I interviewed lots of people. People there just were very happy that Hizmet was there. I think they want to rebuild Iraq, and just very, very grateful to have Hizmet building schools there. So what about proponents of Hizmet schools amongst the Turkish communities in Turkey and Iraq? So in Turkey, so what you see on the side of Iraq, they also said in Turkey, they also spoke about the quality of schools, quality of teachers, but they were also, some Kurdish people that were just sick of the PKK. More Kurds have been killed by Kurds than by any other ethnic group. Okay, more Kurds have been killed by Kurds. So they were, sort of sick of the PKK. Very happy that Kimse Yokmu was actually giving a lot of resources in the southeastern part of Turkey. Many people spoke positively about the fact that Hizmet has a Kurdish radio station and a TV station. Hizmet actually promotes the use of the language, Kurdish language, something that the Kemalists have long fought against. Hizmet gives scholarships to Turkish youth, sends them abroad. People also said that they were happy that Hizmet was sort of providing resources inside of southeastern Turkey because they wanted to have like one Turkey. They didn't want a Kurdistan, they wanted one Turkey, but they just wanted a balance of power between groups, between the south and between the east and the west. And then many Kurdish people said, look, I'm not just I'm not just Kurdish. You think of me, I'm Kurdish. My mother speaks some Kurdish. I don't even speak Kurdish, and much less can I read Kurdish. I identify as a hybrid individual. I'm Kurdish, but I'm also Turkish. I'm also a global citizen. So they just had a different way of identifying than the PKK would have wanted them to identify. So in Iraq, though, people were really happy with the quality of the schools. One woman just said, well, I got my child finally into a Hizmet school. It was kind of like, somebody in California going, yeah, my kid goes to a French school. You got the feeling of prestige. And then the quality of teachers. It's true, a lot of people give up their job as a brain surgeon to come teach in high school. I wish I can put my kids in a Hizmet school, have brain surgeon people, And then the relationship building, the Kurdish people, there's a lot in Iraq, there's a lot of business flowing back and forth between Turkey and Kurdistan in Iraq, Erbil, and so they want to make peace. There's financial reasons to make peace, political reasons to make peace, and at the end of the day, Turkey's flooding money into Iraq, and they like that, right? Why wouldn't they like that? They do. Okay. Okay, so the PKK sees all education as the enemy. This is a quote. It's a quote from an interview with a school principal in Diyarbakir, beautiful, lovely Diyarbakir. And so Hizmet's the enemy, I'm quoting, because it provides education. The PKK would like to have a group of poor, uneducated Kurdish people who can't think critically. Educated people won't join the PKK. The idea is that the PKK is fighting with Hizmet for youth. The PKK would like to have the Kurdish youth not go to school and join the mountains, do some terrorist activity with the PKK in the mountains. So a Kurdish girl, I'm going to get to another quote, and I interviewed her in Erbil also. She said very ambitiously that together she and her schoolgirls would work to solve the Turkish-Kurdish problem. We're going to find a way, she said. We have to change people's minds. Each group sees the other as criminal. So Gulen himself has strongly emphasized that Kurdish should also be taught as part of state curriculum in Turkey and Iraq. And in a June 25th, 2013 article about Hoca Efendi, Gulen, in the online newspaper in Erbil, Iraq, he stated, actually the author of the article stated, Gulen insists that Turkey should not only grant every right to its Kurdish citizens, such as the recognition of use of Kurdish in education, but should also help Kurds who are suffering in other parts of the world. According to him, Turkey should appear as a representative of Kurds who face legal, political, ethnic, and religious difficulties across the world, and should defend their rights at the United Nations and in other international organizations. And so this is my conclusion here. I say, clearly, Fethullah Gulen must be understood as being concerned for the Kurdish people, its liberation, prosperity, and identity. But he offers a very different solution he draws his boundaries very differently than does the PKK. PKK draws their boundaries around, Kurdish nationalism. And in fact, as we know, PKK also, there's drug issues. They're part of a syndicated international drug running operation. All kinds of problems. So their boundaries are not just nationalistic. So the problem with exclusivist identities is that they do not allow growth, flexibility, and change, all necessary for material success in the globalizing world. And those that participate in Hizmet are likely to become better global citizens. Hizmet makes a wide range of efforts to support local cultures and local languages. It provides high-quality educational programs so that Kurdish students can flourish in a variety of ways, return to improve their own communities, and to create forms of Kurdishness of their own free choosing. And I thank you very much.
Thank you again for wonderful 3 presentations. We have actually around 40 minutes for, even more than that, I think, for discussion and the questions. And as you see, just to frame this in a couple of words, the ground is set up for dialogue. We talked about genocide, we talked about the Kurdish issue, and we talked about violence between Muslim and the Christian in Nigeria. So we are set to handle controversial issue. To do that, I would urge anyone who will speak to really be brief and to the point and avoid making speeches as we successfully try to do in this panel. I would open it for a suggestion with one question to everybody, maybe for us to also consider that the notion of exclusion and inclusion and overcoming the otherness, pick the question of are there any boundaries for the setting the inclusion and exclusion? Does it mean to be inclusive that we lose our identity? Or is every act we do to preserve our identity consider exclusion? The basic question, where does exclusion stops and the self-identity really begin in that sense? And that's something people who oppose this theory think that we are pushing toward total homogeneous and one global citizen with no specific identity. But let's take some questions, and I hope you can push the envelope.
Can I make one brief comment, just following directly on what you just said about this, where does exclusion start and identity begin? And we had examples here in the paper and other ones that about Hizmet schools preserving the local culture. And we had a really strong example of that in Dr. Pandya's presentation. So you will see this, any school you go anywhere in Hizmet, this is one of the universal human values you see being pushed is love of country, love of culture, and this is something that they try to ingrain this in students. In some countries it's more difficult than others. And so this is kind of the identity formation of you should love your country because they want these students to grow up and serve their country. Mm-hmm. And the part of inclusivity is also part of the universal human values in the Hizmet school is that, we're all, we love the created for the sake of the creator. We have our common humanity in common, and we need to see each other all as human beings full of worth.
Thank you. Floor is open. Let's start from the back. One. Yes, please. The gentleman in the middle, yes.
This is a question to Jessica Raymond. This is a question directed to Jessica Raymond. Thank you very much for your presentation. One of the things that went through my mind in the juxtaposition of the good Muslim, bad Muslim, I wanted to pose this. I've been a Fulbright scholar at the University of Aleppo in Syria, and in my encounter with the Hizmet movement, I have not found that kind of juxtaposition, and what I want to raise is that I think what you identified is true, but it's true in the United States, And this inherent kind of Manichaean approach that we have in this country, where, according to a former president, the good guys and the bad guys, isn't that more a problem that we have in this country than it is perhaps across the world?
Thank you. Jessica?
Absolutely. Like I said, my research is very highly situated in the United States and Southern California. So this dichotomy between the good Muslim and the bad Muslim was sort of pulled out of interviews by Turkish Hizmet members saying, it started very innocently. They didn't say, oh, well, I hate other Muslims, obviously. It was more like, well, I asked them, why don't you reach out to other ethnic Muslim groups? There was a couple who lived a block away from a Persian, Iranian mosque. I was like, do you guys ever go there? Literally within walking distance. No, we don't go there. We don't pray. Me and my husband don't go there. We go to Turkish culture centers. Why? There was a historical explanation, sort of the tension between the Arab scholars and the Turkish scholars and being Arabic speakers versus non-Arabic speakers. So there's this tension. And I think that has been internalized in like cultural traumatic memory or cultural memory to an othering of the other Muslims. And it is America, because Islamophobia is, it's growing in America. And so, like I said, Hizmet is adaptable, it's flexible, and it has adopted American Islamophobia in certain ways. And so it's very easy for them to overcome this. This is a direction that they can easily show America where to go. So in other countries, I'm sure it's not the case, that there's not this dichotomy, since Hizmet is such a flexible, adaptable structure. But here in America, and in especially Southern California, I would say that there is this growing dichotomy between Hizmet as good Muslims and everybody else as bad Muslims, unfortunately.
Thank you. Yes, please.
Important value to preserve. And I'm wondering if the speakers could comment on the conflict in a city in Switzerland over whether they should allow mosques to go higher than church spires. How do you look at that?
Thank you. You want to start from your end?
Okay. I just think that's funny. If that's really, isn't that funny? We don't want the mosque to go higher than the church spire. It's just one of those silly things. Humans are so weird, aren't we? I mean, come on, how dumb is that? Again, yeah, it has to do with hierarchy. Like, my church is more important, so my church has to be higher. It almost sounds Freudian and phallic to me, Like, I'm not going to go there too in depth, but, come on, I have to have the higher, bigger structure. So it's silly. That's all I'm going to say.
Dr. Johnson, do you have anything to say?
I don't really have anything to add to that.
Yeah.
No.
Okay, I'm tempted me to say something, but I'm going to skip that. Yes, go ahead, please.
Excuse me, I could not understand the border between good Muslim, bad Muslim. And then I think that's based on the Islamophobia. This is a Cold War mentality. If you are not our friend, you are our enemy. I think that make people in Saudi Arabia good Muslim, and that make the Muslim, for example, in Syria bad Muslim. I do not understand that really. Thank you.
think you want to elaborate on that a little bit.
I'm not saying that there are good Muslims and bad Muslims. What I'm saying is that for Hizmet structures in Southern California, there's an active separation. They purposefully separate themselves from other ethnic Muslim groups. And basically they're fostering Turkish Sufi Islam, and so they're trying to brand a specific Islam, and it has the effect of distancing other ethnic Muslims and even other Turkish Muslims that don't ascribe to this specific brand of Islam. And so it is reactionary, though, in lots of ways because of the American context and because of, basically, one informant told me, we know that certain mosques are on watch lists. We know that the government is, very strict about these issues, so we don't want to be involved with them. We don't want to talk to other Muslims. We don't want to get involved with these other ethnic Muslim groups. We don't want to be associated with them because it's this fear of religious persecution. And I think that's also part of their cultural memory with the Turkish nationalism and Ataturk and them sort of having this fear of being religiously persecuted. And they told me, all right, we want to be friends with the government. We want to help the government. We don't want to be engaged in violence. And there's this fear that other Muslims are going to commit violence and then it's going to be sort of attached to Hizmet. So there's this active distancing.
You want to comment?
Yeah, I don't really disagree with anything that Dr. Ayman is saying, but I just want to add there's another layer to this. And this is something that Hizmet takes everything in stages. So where is Hizmet now in the U.S.? I mean, really, for a long time, the big focus was on doing dialogue with Americans, because of 9/11 and because of Islamophobia. And, for other reasons, wanting to just fly under the radar because of this Islamophobic context. But what you see now is Hizmet starting to move to another stage, and where it is more engaging other Muslims. So if you go to Houston, for example, they have a very large cultural center there, and you will see the Friday prayer. The khutbah, the sermon, is given in Turkish and in English. So maybe other communities, they're not at that stage yet, or you just see that starting to happen. But in this way, they're opening up to non-Turkish speaking Muslims. So there's this dimension too. It's a stage thing. And also what they found in Houston is they have a very large group there that they get together for weekly meetings. I don't know how many now, maybe 50 families. And who's coming there? It's second-generation Muslims and converts. Mostly are finding more comfortable space in that cultural center maybe than in the local mosque. So, and then also we have to look at the mosque side. I mean, the non-Turkish Muslims. Do they want to come be with the Turks? So it's a two-way thing also. And I think maybe that's why second generation you're more likely to find at a Turkish cultural center than first generation. So it's there's several layers to this.
Yeah, maybe also this is another aspect to think about the boundaries. Maybe inclusion does not mean that they have to come together on every mosque, on every activity. Where do you set your boundaries? I think you also posed two important questions, the Armenian issue, the justice issue, as well as the non-Abrahamic aspect, which I think was a solid point there. Let me take one from this point, and then I'll come to this side. Yes, please.
My question goes to Dr. Margaret. I was surprised to see where I come from being spoken about. That's Kaduna. I come from Kaduna, and I live there. And for a moment, I could feel the tension we live with constantly. It's like a keg of gunpowder waiting to explode any moment by any spark. My question is this, talking about overcoming otherness, the processes, the methodologies, the approaches of the Hizmet movement, you talked about the teacher who reached out to the villagers and spoke to them, and for once, they could see Islam from a different perspective. Do you have ideas you can suggest to Hizmet movement to reach out to the wider society, and if possible, encourage the spread of this version, this view of Islam? Because in Nigeria, when you reach out through the schools, you don't really make an impact. But when you reach the Muslim communities, through the madrasas, through the local forms of education, not in the Western form, the formal schools, you have more impact. We have a lot of imams. Do you have ideas about how the Hizmet movement can create this kind of impact beyond the formal school setting?
Thank you.
Thank you very much for your question. And, I think what we need to do is turn to Abuja, because there they have the Ufuk Dialogue Institute, and they are doing these kind of other efforts that you're talking about that are outside of the school. And the director of this institute is here also. Hopefully, maybe you know him, or not, certainly you need to meet him. So he's the one to answer this question about the other methods to employ in Nigeria. He's there and doing it. Where are you? Are you here?
All right, good. Nigerian peace building there. All right, we'll go to this side. Yes, ma'am. I'm coming.
Hello, I'm Pam Nice. I would like to know how the Hizmet reaches out to or across cultural divides when there's a power differential and the one who has greater power is actually abusing it against that community. So it's not just a matter of reaching into otherness, somebody who is different from you, but perhaps somebody who is using authority, power against you. How does Hizmet deal with those situations?
Do you have example in mind?
Yeah. No, I would like to know. Well, for instance, the Palestinian-Israeli situation.
I didn't want you to go there, but I think she sailed in a different direction.
Yeah, so I mean, I can speak to the
Kurdish and the
Turkish and the
yes.
Kurdish situation. There's some parallels. And so the power that the Kurdish, PKK activists would have would be the power to strike fear into people's heart that they might, and to Kurdish civilians' heart, and also into Turkish civilians' heart that they might cause some violence. So that's some power. And so what I've found is that the Hizmet movement is composed of individuals that are very brave, in fact. They're very brave. They just set themselves up. In October 2012 alone, there were over a dozen attacks on schools, where some schools were burnt in this Kurdish region of Turkey. And in Iraq, of course, some teachers are going from Turkey into Iraq, not just in beautiful, safe Erbil, but into near places in Baghdad or all over where there's suicide bombings. People are being blown up in weddings, and they're attending weddings. So they're just being very brave. And I think that that's one thing that the Hizmet participants do really well. They sacrifice time, sacrifice, like a cushier lifestyle for other people. So, I mean, we've been talking about boundaries and exclusion versus inclusion. And of course, we have to remember that Hizmet's not a monolithic entity that wakes up and brushes its teeth and then goes have cornflakes. And there's no, at least I didn't get the Hizmet ring yet, or the Hizmet card yet, right? There's no real boundary around what Hizmet is. Hizmet itself is amorphous, diffuse, and changes wherever it is. So we can't, and so I think Jessica herself did a great job making sure that people knew that she was speaking about certain people and their interviews when she spoke about Hizmet. And I think we all, when we speak about what Hizmet does, we have to just situate it, because of course, when boundaries, exclusion, it all has to do with context.
But maybe just to add one thing here, if you ask about structure, power is reflected in structures. And in her example, there were 3 attempts where the Hizmet in the Kurdish context challenged the Turkish government structure in terms of language and radio and also education itself. These structures are manifestation of power, and the movement here intentionally confronted them. I'm not sure on their position on other things, but these are examples specific.
No, you answered my question better than I did. Very good.
Yes. I think you took the mic, right? Yes.
Once again, I'd like to thank the panelists for extremely interesting presentations. I'd like to address my question to Sophia. And if we try to incorporate the issue of Kurds and Hizmet movement, Turkish Kurds and Hizmet movement, into political context. For example, the ruling AKP announced a Kurdish deal several years ago. We saw an Arabic Spring. The political situation changed considerably. And does this new deal of Turkish government affected the situation, affected the issue of Hizmet movement and Turkish Kurds? Thank you.
Thank you.
Yeah, and so Erdogan and Öcalan have come to somewhat of an agreement, and very recently you've had, a ceasefire, and you've also had, we've witnessed the fact that in Turkey now, The enormous concession was that you can teach Kurdish at private schools, still not in public schools, but in private schools. But that's a step in the right direction. And I think perhaps Hizmet pressure on the AKP government. You know, sometimes people say that Hizmet and the AKP government are the same, and they're all trying to create a new, you know, like Iran. But this is not the case. There's a lot of tension, of course, between Erdogan and the Hizmet group. Lots and lots of tension. But I believe that Hizmet probably has pressured, along with the Kurdish community, pressured Erdogan to make some peace, and it's been successful. And I think that that's a point of commonality now between Hizmet and Erdogan's recent activities, because Hizmet leaders were really, really upset with the amount of violence that AKP government did, in fact, use against the Kurdish people.
Thank you. We have the lady there, and then I'll come back to, I'll go down here, and then I got you.
Hi, my question is also for Dr. Panya. I was wondering if you could talk a little bit, if you have any knowledge, on Hizmet's activity in Turkey regarding the Alevi community, and how they've worked on those tensions similarly or differently to its efforts in Turkey regarding the Kurds.
Yeah, I don't have a big, long answer about that. I know that the Alevis are Shiites, and that sometimes they suffer from, I mean, one criticism that the Shiite Kurdish community had for me about the Hizmet movement was that they thought that the Hizmet movement saw them as Zoroastrian. There's the Zoroastrian slur. So in fact, some Kurdish Shiites do have some Zoroastrian influence in their religious practice. We can't trace a line. That doesn't make them Zoroastrians, but that's the only answer I have. I'm sure there's a much longer answer, and I just don't have it.
I mean,
Thank you.
there's the project in Ankara, maybe you're familiar with, where Hizmet is building a joint worship structure. So the Turkish mosque and then Alevi also place of worship together. It's a complex that's being built together. I mean, joined physically.
Mm-hmm. Thank you. Yes.
I would like to bring some clarification to this Kurdish education. I don't want people to have this opinion that AK Party is very stingy in giving this right. First of all, you can learn Kurdish in Turkish schools now. This is a fact. What the Kurdish we're talking about in private schools is a language of instruction in other subjects. So let's understand that this is not a curtailment of their rights. And the other thing, of course, in addition to the Alevi groups, it's not only a church and a mosque, and also they have a public kitchen, which is part of their belief. And I think in Turkey, it's a very gray culture based on images and slogans and, you know, sculptures and things like that. But they would like to create the image of the Alevi way of instruction. Instead of defining things, Turks are more readily accept things at their face value. So a Cemevi is a Cemevi. We don't have to discuss whether it's a mosque, what kind of a thing it is it an institution, it's a public club or a social club. So I think there is hope, and luckily the public in many of these areas where Hizmet is providing a very good service is ahead of the politicians' curve. So they'll be able to catch this up. Thank you
for your clarification, and we're moving to the edge of this side here. Maybe it would be helpful if you say some of your names and where you're from or what you're doing.
I am Joe Annunziata. I'm affiliated with Pax Christi International. I've been their representative at the UN for a number of years. But I'm wondering, and this is speculation, when we talk about peace building and why there is no peace and violence in many cases between various religious groups, including the Abrahamic groups. And you wonder if they all believe in peace, why is it that we don't have peace among many of these groups? I think in my understanding, the problem is one that we often intellectualize our religion and our belief so that we say, we know, Christians know who God is, that there are three persons in one God, or we know the Muslims know who God is, etc., and the Jews, because we have an intellectual understanding. Whereas those people who think of religion as something of the heart rather than of the mind, so that we are dealing with human beings who are in need. And so we go out and reach out to all common human beings and do what is necessary to help them.
Thank you. So is there a question, or because I think you answered your question?
Well, this is the whole Hizmet proposition. I mean, Fethullah Gulen would say it starts with a human being. So I claim this is a peace movement, but it's a very unique one with a long-term horizon. They're not looking for quick, instant fixes. So they're starting with educating the child and educating the heart and mind. So it's this kind of reform. We have to reform ourselves. So, you know, Hoja Effendi's philosophy, the philosophy of the Hizmet movement, I mean, governments have not brought us world peace. Treaties have not brought us peace. These bureaucratic structures haven't. So Hizmet approach is, we're going to start with the human being. That's a very difficult thing, really. But Hizmet's like, it's okay. It's okay, it doesn't happen in my lifetime. I'm maybe dedicating my whole life, go overseas and study and, you know, live in Africa or wherever. It's okay. This is the real way. And that's, I would say, would be Hizmet's answer to your question.
You want to?
Yeah, and what you're speaking to is religious particularism, when each group sort of just claims truth, and that disconnect between the intellectualization of truth and feeling the truth. I mean, I think it's just a matter of articulation and sort of language and the ability to articulate. But I think if we think it, we can feel it. If we feel it, we need the tools to think it. So, which is why education is so instrumental to help that articulation process.
Thank you. To build on that, you mentioned something why these groups they preach peace, but they have violence. And I think that was the primary one of them. And that's really equality for all religious people. In fact, that's equality for all people. Rarely we walk our talk, and you know that. And I think the three examples we were here are examples of attempts to walk the talk, you know, in a small way. The final point on this, there is no such thing, peace. There are people who work to improve the quality of life, and this ideal image that we're all moving toward, this heavenly, peaceful place in the world, is sometimes ideals that bring people down because we keep focusing on the failure. Yes, please. Yes, yes.
Hello, everyone. My name is Tezcan İnanlar from Los Angeles Pacifica Institute. I'd like to make a comment on Jessica's talk. And yes, about the Turkish Americans, especially in Hizmet, and their attitudes to non-Turkish Muslims. Around the 9/11, I agree because of the subconscious experiences that newly immigrated Turkish Americans to the Western part especially, that had effect on engaging of those two groups. But nowadays, I don't agree that there is that much separation. As an institute, Pacifica Institute has now has agreement with Bayan College, which is an Islamic college, aimed to educate Muslims, American Muslim leaders, to serve in America. So there are very strong agreements between the two institutions and very good, communication. I think it's a matter of time, of a process, that newly immigrant Turkish Americans engaging in United States. And because of that subconscious experience that they have from Turkey, especially that being suppressed religiously, about their religious rights and so on. So it's a process, okay. and I think that should be mentioned. Thank you.
Thank you. I think we should take a couple of more questions. We still have about 8 minutes. Yes. Yes, go ahead. This gentleman here.
Eugeniusz Sakowicz. I have a question to Dr. Sofia Pandya. You told about people who are against Hizmet movement, and I remember the sentence. These people tell, Kurdish people who join Hizmet movement are not Kurdish people, are not Kurds. And we can listen to the same opinion all over the world. For example, Hindu people tell that Hindu people who join Christianity are not Christians. Jewish tell Jewish people who join Christianity are not Jewish. And please don't compare these sentences. I have very primitive question, like a child. Is it possible to change mind people who are against us? Is it possible to change their mind, or I must change my mind first of all? How to change these people who give these opinions like this?
Thank you.
Yeah, so your question is very profound. It's simple but very profound. And I think that's what Hizmet's trying to struggle with. How do I do it? You know, how can we do this? And so people ask me all the time about the gender issue. You know, sometimes there's events and they say, where's the women? And they ask me about this all the time, and I say, well, they're with the really young children, or they're there, you just didn't look. But the thing is that one thing that the women do really well is to distribute food. And I loved hearing the cook yesterday talk about the power of food. Wasn't that wonderful? I just thought about the power of food. And so, and I love Turkish food. And so, you know, they make these huge pots of Noah's pudding, right? Ashura, and knock at people's door, okay? And, you know, and just say, you know, I know you don't like Muslims. I know you don't like people from the Middle East. It's okay, just have my pudding. You know, you just eat with people, hang out, eat with people, humanize. You know, I know you don't like me, I'm going to hell, whatever, it's okay, just have some tea. And I think that this patience and patience that Hizmet has with other people is very powerful patience. Yes, you can criticize us, you know, have some lunch. It's very, very powerful because it's very humanizing.
Okay, thank you. Yes,
you know,
please.
I took my 15 minutes to tell a story. And I hope that story showed how people's minds and hearts can be changed, because that's exactly what happened in that village in Nigeria.
So you had your question, yeah? Here, this gentleman here in the middle. I know it's hard to go in, but thank you.
This is slightly a different question.
You want to tell us your name? If
Shanti.
Shanti, yes.
A slightly different question about being an exception. I don't think the movement is an exception, because if it is an exception, then it demands special attention, which means internally it clamors for essentialization, to essentialize itself. And I don't think Hojafekan, Gulen movement claims an exception. Why do you need to be exception to do good? Because it is good to do good. It is just good to do good.
Okay.
Therefore, claiming exception is not Hizmet, because it leads to essentialize itself. And to essentialize itself is to deny the very search for it. Therefore, we need to be careful about this subtlety within the movement.
Okay.
Because if you ask him, are you an exception? If you go to Pennsylvania and ask him, he would have a very subtle smile on his face, because it is not, because he is not. Therefore, it is important for us to, as we reflect together here in DC to understand, not to essentialize that which is not.
Thank you. Thank you.
Yeah, I think you're right. I mean, Hojo Effendi would say something along those lines, and even would say that, and the people in Hizmet would say this, that what he did through his speeches and lectures and writings is that he awoken the sensibilities that were already there lying dormant in the Turkish population. He reawakened their predisposition already, which is human predisposition to be altruistic and loving and reaching out to others. So, and this is, of course, we can't say exceptionalism, because then what is the Hizmet project, as you say? Because the Hizmet project is to awaken this that's in all of us. I mean.
Thank you. Any more
Can
questions?
I comment just real
Yes,
quick?
please.
I think it is exceptional in that I am not a Hizmet member, I'm not a Hizmet follower, and I'm externally applying the label. And I think it's exceptional because it is different, because it is a new model that other people can adopt. Now, when it is not new, when it is not different, when other groups are adopting this model, then it won't be exceptional, because then the movement has branched out and it's included all of these other groups, but it is exceptional in that it is different. If this was the structure of every group, its flexibility, its adaptability, then we wouldn't have the type of violence that we're seeing that perpetuates, right? That's why it's exceptional. So when I apply the term exceptional or exceptionalism, it's as an outsider looking in, as a structure and as a group and as a model that can be adopted to regular society, religious groups. And there is a structure. It's an extremely adaptable, flexible structure, but there are theories and methodologies and tenets that are all working to create that structure, that flexibility. And so that's why I think it's exceptional.
I'm going to take the last question for myself to ask them with your permission. And then we'll close after that. My question is that, and you didn't comment on that, the otherness is not only ethnic, racial, religious, or national. The otherness can be anyone but the self. And the notion of gender, how does Hizmet, or in your sort of research or your work, how does the movement deal with the otherness of women?
Who are you asking? Jessica, right? Jessica?
The researcher and the practitioner and the peacemaker in Erbil and Kurd. So, any reflection on that? What?
Can I give an answer to that question? The last panel was an all-male affair. This one is an all-female affair. So don't guys see the
You see, they gender segregate, even at the panel level.
Yeah.
Not only that, you want to give me an answer to feel comfortable, no. And the whole point was for you not to answer for them.
But I think, let me just say something. I think there's some tension and progress and change, and within the Hizmet movement as well. So I think Hoja Effendi himself both stresses the importance of the domestic realm for men and for women. It's domesticating for men too, and for women. That the domestic realm and your job, and in terms of what you do in the house with your family, is extremely important. But he also wants girls to go to school. The Hizmet movement has founded many, many, many schools for women. And most of my friends, female friends in the movement, they're beautiful. Their scarves are matching their shoes and all this stuff, look very harmless. And I say, what do you do? Chemical engineer. And, so it's just, the ones that I know that I interviewed for part of the book that I edited, they were doing the sciences like there's no tomorrow, which is a male-centric field, androcentric field. And Hoja Effendi himself has said that women should learn karate, probably to deal with their husbands. And, although I've seen men within the movement increasingly wash dishes, serve the tea, all kinds of stuff like that. So, and the men get teased, by the way. It's somewhat hard to be a man within the movement. They get told that they're not performing their masculinity adequately enough. They're not macho enough. They're not, out there womanizing, swaggering, and smoking cigars, and and all of that. So, thus they must be wimps. And so they have to walk around. There's even these abi purses. Have you guys seen the abi purses? Yeah. So if, some people have said, "Wow, this looks like a feminization of the Turkish male," but it's not. It's just a valorization on the domestic realm, a valorization on being peaceful. Peacefulness doesn't have to be equated with femininity. It can just be a human thing. It's just bringing back peacefulness and and the family back to everybody.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
Yes. So this is the big question,
I'm
and I can answer this on several levels, but most maybe I should keep quiet. But I had a chance to visit Hizmet in many different locations around the world, alhamdulillah, and I would like to say that in some of those places the women were really happy, and in other places they were like pretty discontent. So if we, as Sophia talked about, if we look at the philosophical level from Hoja Effendi, there's no barriers in the philosophy for women fully participating in Hizmet. But in reality, in some places, there are.
Yeah.
And I think it really comes down to the leadership. So some men are more culturally conservative than others, and some places it seems that Hizmet is more like a Turkish men's club. And even I had a woman ask me, how can I do my Hizmet? I mean, because that's what it boils down to, is that women and men, they both want to do their Hizmet. If they get a chance to do it, the women are happy. When somehow there seems barriers in the way, which can happen in different kinds of ways, and I've seen it happen different kinds of ways, then the women, they get, discontent because they want to do their Hizmet too. And I will tell you an interesting story about Sophia, the character.
You really have 5 seconds.
Okay, 5 seconds. Okay, so she got married. Her one criteria was, I want to marry a Hizmet teacher that is working overseas, because she wanted to go overseas and teach, and at that time single women were not going. That was her one criteria. She didn't care anything else. So she got her wish, and she went to Africa. Now, shortly after that, I've also had the privilege of meeting the first single woman who went to Africa as a single woman. So it's changing, but it's up to the leadership. They're putting the barriers, but they're also creating the opportunities. So that's.
Rehman, you want to add anything?
Progress over perfection. We'll get there. Just got to keep at it.
I think this is a perfect note to end this panel. Please join me in thanking our provocative panel. Thank you very much.